Awesome. All right. Again, for those of you that don't know me now, by now, my name is Shawn Conley. I'm the state soybean and small grain specialist here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And today, I think I'm just going to walk through and talk some of the things that we've been looking at in terms of refocusing some efforts on soybean and winter wheat variety selection, and really kind of hit on some of the performance criteria that farmers should be selecting to ensure basically maximizing yield and profitability. So if we look here across the state of Wisconsin, we've kind of refocused and moved some of our experimental sites. But some of the goals of our variety testing program in terms of our winter wheat performance program is what we really do is we screen on average about 100 different lines of soft red winter wheat that are brought to us either from universities, private breeding programs, or some experimental lines from some of our partner universities across the Midwest. I guess what we're really trying to do is look at how well these varieties perform across the state. And we've made some of our movements, but again, the locations that we planted this last year and this year are at Arlington, Fond du Lac, Random Lake, and Waterloo. And this is kind of, if you will, the heart of the winter wheat growing region of the state of Wisconsin. There's an idea of the book, and I want to thank Liz for dropping a link into the chat for us. But this is our book from 2024. One of the interesting things we're able to do here with these varieties and these locations is really get an idea of how well these the genetic responses and the G by E, and sometimes we work with Damon Smith and look at the management part of it. One of the key things that we look at in Wisconsin is winter survival. We screen a lot of genetics from a lot of different germplasm suppliers. We look at how well they perform for overwintering. We're very fortunate to have Damon Smith here in his lab. His program comes through, and if we have any type of a disease at any one of our locations, he'll go through and his crew will go through and rate all of the plots for diseases, and that information then is provided in our winter wheat book. So thank you, Damon, and your lab for being able to do that. We also look at recording heading date, lodging, and then the last 2 years, specifically in 2024, both test wheat and yield were probably the most important factors in addition to disease resistance. So kind of have these highlighted here on the right where yield is based on the genetic potential and the environmental conditions. Obviously, that G by E response. Test week, we had some huge dockages in 2024 with test weight. And we always get questions like, what's a primary driver for that? First of all, genetic performance. Genetics is a big key in this. And we'll kind of talk about some of the big swings we were able to measure this last year. But also weather. I mean, this weather was very conducive for having lower test weights. Anytime we get into this wet weather, I know it's the old adage, wheat does not like wet feet. And this year we had a very wet spring, and that kind of led into some of the challenges where we were unable, just on the environment, to be able to have really low test weights. And then disease resistance. It's been a few years since we've seen Fusarium head blight in Wisconsin, but we had 2 major locations where we saw some pretty significant injury with that. As well as stripe rust, which we hadn't seen in probably since Brian Mueller was in Damon Smith as a graduate student. So we're able to have Damon Smith group go through and talk about that in terms of rating our different varieties for that. Liz had dropped this link into the chat, but you go to our small greens variety testing program right here, and then you can either download a PDF version or an Excel spreadsheet. I know most farmers really like, and crop consultants for that matter, really like the Excel spreadsheet because we have this so that you can sort your different columns based on whatever the characteristic of interest is, be it test weight, disease performance, yield. And then we also have this as a combined setting here across all of our locations or individually from Arlington, Fond du Lac, Random Lake, and Waterloo. And once you get into those individual tabs, that's where you'll get some of the disease performance information will be kind of in those individual tabs where we saw those diseases of interest. This is what you'll see if you download the PDF. You will see kind of this idea of what we have, how a specific variety is listed, and I'll kind of walk you through this chart here. So what we did have is all the varieties listed alphabetically by their brand name and then their entry, what number they may have. Then what we do is we have the four-test average for both yield and test weight, as well as individual sites here marked. And then if that variety was also tested in 2022, we provide that information as well. For the stars indicate that variety is not significantly different, the highest yielding variety in that location. So generally what we'll do is we'll find what that highest yielding variety is. We will run a statistical analysis and look at the Peebles 0.10 level and which varieties do not differ statistically from that highest yielding variety. And depending on the year, that could be anywhere from like 20 to 8 varieties that yield similar to that high yielding variety, which means basically yield the same. Be able to pick a variety out on that performance characteristic. Now here's an example of a data table that we downloaded, and I kind of did some manipulations on here just to kind of make you aware of what you can do with this, but I'll kind of walk us through here. What I did is I went through and I looked at the Arlington tab that we had shown in the previous slide, and then I sorted based on test weight. Again, there was pretty significant test weight dockages across the state of Wisconsin in 2024, and we had heard numbers like well over $1 to $2 dock, so pretty significant out here. And if we just go through and sort our varieties specifically by test weight, what I did is I took some of the lower test weights here. So the lowest test weight at our Arlington trial had a test weight of 52.1 pounds per bushel. And then I took the highest test weights as well, which in this case was 59.3. So the point we want to make here is there was a 7.2 pound difference in test weight just based on variety selection alone. So I know winter wheat's already been planted, and we saw a lot of good yielding but high test wheat seed planted going from the 2024 to 25 growing season. But I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of these functions and that you could sort by yield, test weight, but also if you have disease issues. And again, I want to thank Damon Smith and his program for going through and rating all of our plots for both fusarium head blight. We have both incidence and severity, as well as stripe rust. So that gives us a good example of what we saw here. And again, we can see some correlations where we had some pretty high incidence of stripe rust. What this means is this variety here, this Dynagro 9533 had 100% incidence of stripe rust. Basically means every single plant was showing a symptom of stripe rust, and the severity was 29%. So it was a pretty significant amount. And we see several of these varieties that had, high incidence as well as severity of stripe rust. So this is really good information to kind of bring forward and help you as a farmer kind of sort out these varieties. Because again, there's quite a few. In this year, we had well over 100 varieties in this growing season, and going into the 2024-2025 growing season, I think we planted 96 varieties across the state. And all our winter wheat is planted. We did have enough precipitation, rainfall to be able to get it all emerged. So we are in good shape. Obviously, we could all use some rainfall. So with this, what I think I'll do is I'll pause. I did see a hand up. I'll just see we have a little bit of a second here. If there's a specific question on winter wheat, I'd be happy to take that now. I'll give it a minute if there's anything in chat. Chat. Nope. All right. So what we'll do now is we'll move on to our soybean program and review. So like winter wheat, my program runs the soybean variety testing program across the state of Wisconsin. And this goes from Spooner, Wisconsin, all the way down to Clinton, and from Platteville up to Seymour. And what we're at this point is we only have one location left to harvest. Every other location is out. Yesterday, the crew harvested Menominee and Spooner. Galesville was out yesterday. Adam Roth is harvesting Marshfield right now. So our last location to be harvested will be Platteville, and that location will be harvested tomorrow, pending any mechanical type issues. So we're in good shape in terms of harvest. However, as if you were on here earlier, when the climatologist was able to provide some information with the drought stress, obviously this early harvest isn't great for farmers. We've harvested a lot of beans that were small in seed size and in that 8% moisture. So again, we're seeing some reduced yields based on the lack of rainfall over the last 6 weeks, which has limited our seed size, but also our percent moisture is really low that we're actually able, that we're seeing some reduced yields based on that moisture content as well. So again, it hasn't been a stellar year for soybeans in terms of yield, just based on the last 6 weeks, and that seed fill period has been reduced due to the lack of rainfall. A couple of things on the soybean variety selection. I've kind of changed my tune over the last probably decade on how we should really focus on soybean variety selection, and I'll point those out here in a second. First of all, just like our winter wheat, soybean yield should be focused on yield consistency. We'll talk about that in a short bit here. Disease tolerance, which we'll touch on briefly in a minute as well, and herbicide traits. Again, we've seen a lot of that movement in terms of introgressing different herbicide traits and being able to select varieties based on the specific modes of action and herbicide traits you're looking at. And we'll kind of walk through a slide at the end discussing that as well. We also talk about maturity selection, and I just have ish next to that. I think of these traits, maturity selection is probably the least important, and we'll kind of touch that on a different slide. One of the points here we really want to talk about is we've been preaching for a long time about choosing multiple varieties from different company umbrellas to spread that genetic risk, and that's been difficult, given the fact that it's the same genetic code can be sold under different brand names. One thing that has been recently released in March 6th of 2023, a USDA AMS published a report titled More and Better Choices for Farmers, Promoting Fair Competition and Innovation in Seeds and Other Agricultural Inputs. And a couple key labeling things I want the farmers to make sure they're aware of, but also to make sure when they talk to their seed person that this is discussed, is that as a farmer, you should have access to the variety name of the seed you are purchasing no later than when your seed is scheduled to ship, and usually at the point when you make purchasing decisions. So what this is telling you as a farmer is that you have the right to know what that genetic code is at the time you're making purchasing decisions, which is right now, so that you can work towards making sure that you do have genetic diversity across your field landscape. So again, this is available on my website. Feel free to kind of look into this and utilize this when you're making your seed purchasing decisions. Okay. Another thing that I've changed here is you see we used to have this use multi-year, multi-location yield trial information. And I would say, yes, still use multi-year, multi-location yield trial. But one of the challenges we've seen with herbicide-resistant weeds and this movement to these new traits is we generally don't have the same varieties here every single year. And what I mean by that is that when I first started in this program roughly 17 years ago, we would have 70% of the varieties planted in one year would be present in the second year. Now we're roughly in that 30% range. So only about 30% of the varieties we plant in 2024, we will see again in 2025. So it's really been difficult for farmers to get access to that multi-year information because the genetic turnover is so quick these days compared to what it used to be. So I really encourage farmers to look at multi-location yield data. And that can be from university trials. This can be from industry trials. This could be outside of the state of Wisconsin for some of these larger companies that sell similar or the same seed variety across multiple states. Again, just take a look at that and utilize this. And you're looking for consistency and high yielding. Another thing that's of interest is you try to match it with your environment, i.e. the crop rotation, tillage system, a no-till versus till. One of the things we did do this year is we were able to pull, and this is funding through the Wisconsin Soybean Marketing Board, we actually physically pulled some varieties out and we screened them in a trial where we have cover crops. So we went in and planted a whole slew of different varieties into no cover crops, into ones we terminated at planting, and then ones we terminated 2 weeks after planting. So what we're really trying to get is look at what is the variety by management interaction. And I'm not really specifically looking at varieties per se because they turn over so quickly. What I'm trying to look at is how much variability among genetics do we have going into a cover crop system? Do they all perform similarly? If so, great, good to know. That way you can treat all varieties the same. Or do we see a lot of variability, which is good to know as well, so that you understand that a certain pedigree may or may not perform well in a cover crop environment. So be looking for some of that information coming out this fall as we're just looking at that diversity of how well the genetics interact in these different management systems. And lastly, balance seed costs with yield potential. And I'll kind of talk about that in another slide as well. All right. So here's my whole slide when we were talking about optimal maturity group-ish. We redrew these maturity group maps for the United States and Wisconsin about 8 years ago. We'll be updating this in a couple of years, gives you a sense of where we would be. And we've basically seen a whole maturity group difference from where this old map was. What I mean by that, if we look here in Dane County where this 2.5 maturity group bean was, the last map that was published for the state of Wisconsin would have said you should be planting a 1-5. So we've actually added a whole maturity group bean difference to our maturity group in here in Wisconsin. Okay. Now, one of the things we really try to get at farmers is if you're looking at either planting winter wheat following soybean or trying to establish a cover crop after soybean, what we really see here is basically how quickly these crops mature. So basically what we found, and this is some information from some early relative maturity, late maturity beans, is that for every basically one relative maturity group bean, we see plus or minus roughly 12 days. What do I mean by that? So if you plant a 2.5 bean in southern Wisconsin, all right, and it'll come off, it's coming off now, but normally it'd come off 10 days from now in a normal year, you would be able to back off and harvest that a 1.5 roughly 2 weeks earlier. So it'd give you an opportunity to get your winter wheat established quicker, as well as getting a cover crop in the ground. So the question is, yes, I can get it out faster, but what does that mean for yield? I'll come back to that slide. Relatively, what we see is, again, here we are in southern Wisconsin, where we're trying to get farmers to plant a 2.5 maturity group bean. You could plant anywhere from a 1.5 to a 3.0 bean, and we don't see, on average, any huge differences. Obviously, there's varietal differences. That's a genetic component. But on average, relative maturity is pretty consistent until we get to a whole maturity group bean earlier, and then we start seeing that yield plateau and drop off, okay? So it's just something to think about. So the point I'm making here is that on average, if you normally plant a 2.5 bean, you could plant a 1.5 bean if you do your due diligence, get a high yielding variety that yields the same, and you can harvest it 10 days sooner, get your winter wheat or your cover crop established 10 days sooner, which will give you a yield gain in both of those in terms of both wheat yield, but also gaining in biomass for carbon sequestration, as well as potential yield, potential weed management for the 2025 growing season. All right. A couple of things I also want to point out. We do a lot of testing across the state of Wisconsin. These are some of the trials that we do. In addition, at these sites, we do many management trials. We do anything from seeding rates to biological trials at all of these locations. But here's a good point we drew out, and I'm working with Dr. Damon Smith on this as he's doing a lot of phytophthora screening. And interestingly enough, the last time we looked at this, which is a couple years ago, and we should redo this, but If we looked at our variety trials from 2022, that out of 265 varieties we tested, 25% of those varieties did not list any Phytophthora resistance genes. This is a huge challenge that we're running into. I know Damon Smith is going to be talking about this winter, but it's a huge problem that we see in Wisconsin. And the fact that 25% of the varieties we tested didn't even have a single gene in them is a big problem. So what I try to get farmers to do is realize and do some fact checking in here. Because unlike never mind, I was going to make a political joke, but I'm fine if you fact check me. All right, so just like our winter wheat trials, we have our soybean variety trials. You can download an Excel spreadsheet. You can sort by grain composition. You can sort by yield. You can sort for all different characteristics. But one of the things we also do is look at how much value does variety selection provide you, that farmer? And in 2023, across our southern Wisconsin region, we saw a 17 bushel yield difference between our highest yielding variety and our lowest yielding variety. And at $9 beans, that means the cost, i.e. the price of selecting a poor variety, cost you at $9 beans $153. This goes back to that point about wanting to pay for high yielding seed. I think it's pretty clear if you do your research and if you spend another $10 to $15 a unit for beans, the return on investment on that is usually 10 to 1. I mean, that's clearly. And if you go back into a year like 2017, where we had a lot of white mold, and high prices, that $10 per acre decision would provide you an extra $581 value in your pocket per acre just by making that variety selection difference. Other things. So we collect a lot of information in our variety trial books. If you go in the back, we can go through at the specific varieties, look at what maturity groups are in there, what herbicide traits, what seed treatments are on there, but also SCN resistance. We're starting to see that PI88, 788, performance lag off in terms of we're seeing the SCN overcome PI88, 788 resistance. So we do have some Peking varieties available. Look how well they perform across the state, be able to integrate those into your farm. But also our Phytophthora resistant genes. And we have these linked in here in terms of which varieties carry which resistance genes. Lastly, one thing that we've been doing since I came here is anytime we get a new herbicide resistance trait, we look at how well it performs across the state in any given year. And last year in 2023, we saw basically no difference among all the varieties between the E3 beans and the XtendFlex, which basically tells farmers in Wisconsin that you just picked a herbicide chemistry program that works best for your farm, and the performance is on average the same between those two. So with that, I know I covered a lot of stuff, but I want to be respectful of people's time. To 1:30, I will stop sharing and see if there's any questions for me, either in the chat or live. So here we go.